Hello and welcome to another episode of the Small Agency Talk Show. We are live with two people who should be entertaining and hopefully informative at the same time. First up, we've got Gini Dietrich, the founder of Spin Sucks and the co-host of a wicked cool podcast on agency leadership that comes out every week. Welcome to the show, Gini.
Brother. I wonder what show that is. I really wanted to count down with the countdown. Can I do that next time?
You know, if I say no, you're going to do it anyway, so it doesn't really matter. I mean,
all right, consider this your forewarning then. Next time.
Great, fantastic. My other guest is slightly more respectful of me at times, Patrick Rogan, the founder of Ignition HR. I said, first of all, I said at times, okay? I mean, but in any case, it's great to have
I interrupted where he's from. Sorry.
He's the founder of Ignition HR.
There you go. Thank you.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Right. Well, with that stellar opening, I'm going to hit the little music and all fancy stuff that comes on the screen, and then we'll get into the meat and potatoes of the show.
All right.
All right. Here we all are. We've played the music. We've done the intro, so now we get to talk about substance. Unfortunately, we don't get to listen to Ginny's hamster because she moved the hamster out of the room just before we went live because the hamster apparently decided that it was time for, a Peloton workout or something.
Well, it does live in this house. Although hamsters are nocturnal, so I'm not really sure why she decided to do that. You can still kind of hear her in the kitchen.
I can't, and that's all I care.
Okay, that's all. That's all I care about as well.
So if I can't hear it, then probably other people can't hear it either. So in any case, all right. So as always, if you have comments or questions or feedback, feel free to use the comment or chat box on whatever platform you are watching on. We would love to have you steer us in a different direction. But before you steer us in a different direction, we are going to start out with one topic that I thought would be interesting given the guests here. Ginny, you have operated a remote agency for a long time. Patrick, you have advised agencies and other businesses on HR for a long time, but over the last year, a lot more agencies are either doing just remote interviews or hiring people to work remotely. And so I thought it would be interesting for a few minutes at least to talk about the challenges of doing an interview process remotely over Zoom and things like that, as opposed to the traditional in-person approach that most of us have become accustomed to over the course of our careers, as well as what do you look for when you're hiring an employee that you expect will be working remotely, because there are certain characteristics, I think, that help define someone who's more apt to succeed in that kind of environment.
It's funny because we've been doing it for so long that I don't find it challenging to do interviews on Zoom anymore. And it's weird. It's very strange that I have employees I've never met in person, which is very weird. Mostly because those people are in Europe or South America. So because of that, I've never actually met them in person. But we have found that, in those first couple of years when we were trying to interview over Zoom, well, we couldn't even use Zoom back then. It didn't even exist yet. We were doing it over Skype. It was really clunky. And I think it was a lot harder because your internet might go out or you had the pauses or the jumps over each other, and it was a little bit more clunky. Today, that almost doesn't exist, especially if somebody's using, they're actually plugged into the internet versus the Wi-Fi. And it's pretty clear. And it's, Patrick, you and I have never met in person, but it creates an opportunity for us to build a relationship really quickly without bringing someone to Chicago, wining and dining them, doing the whole in-person thing for 3 days. And I love it. I'm a big, big, big fan of doing all this virtually.
Although I do miss steaks from Chicago, I got to tell you.
I could send you some.
It's a great town for wine and dining. But I totally agree with you. Yeah, it is definitely more efficient being able to interact just like we are right now. And the interview process definitely can go much more quickly. I really like the automation. I guess I do have a bias personally for face-to-face conversations, but since I haven't had many in the last year, I've kind of gotten used to.
Or if you have, you've had a mask on. So
right? Yeah.
mask to mask.
Well, that kind of takes the effect out of it. But I know in the interview area specifically, one of the areas I work on, particularly with my agency clients, is making sure that they're still doing the fundamentals, right? That they're asking the right questions, they ask follow-up questions, and that it's a little bit more visible and potentially recordable, which scares me a little bit.
That's actually a really great point. Yeah.
And some organizations I know and companies are actually getting disclosure forms signed by candidates before they interview, where they agree not to record. I don't know if I would recommend that. That seems a little big brotherish to me.
Yeah.
But I do understand the concern. And when I've heard afterwards some of the interview questions interviewers have asked, it scares the heck out of me. So, it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I've seen enough questions asked during interviews or heard about them that the idea of them being recorded is certainly very scary. I certainly wouldn't advocate having folks sign it because I think it sets the wrong tone from the get-go. But secondly, all that really does is keep it from showing up in a court case. It doesn't, prevent them from using it against you in other ways.
Well, and truth be told, if you're doing, even if you're doing interviews in person, people can record it on their phone.
Sure.
If they're going to record it, they're going to record it.
Right. The trick is just don't do or say things that you have a problem. If there is a recording, that would be my advice. But it goes to the point, and I think that this is particularly prevalent in the agency community, is that a lot of folks have never been trained on how to do interviews properly, and they don't even have an idea as to what permissible questions are or aren't. Some of the stories I've been told by folks about the questions that they really like to ask in interviews have just blown my mind. I remember one who told me that his favorite question was to ask what folks like to do on Saturday night. And I'm like, why?
No.
And it actually came from a good place. The idea was, I want to get to know the person, right? And so it's supposed to be a comfortable question that encourages them to speak. But no, all the things that can come up in the process of that question. No. But it was someone who had never had any kind of training or even guidance from managers. And so I think it's important to have that kind of training, particularly in that environment where it is so much easier to have it recorded. And honestly, in part because in this virtual way, it's better than doing it on the telephone as far as being able to pick up cues and realize, okay, this person looks uncomfortable. Maybe I want to change the tactic here or redirect the question or something like that. So video does help. It's still not quite as good as in person for that, but it has gotten better than it was 5 or 6 years ago when I was doing remote interviews. So I think to both of your points, the technology has advanced enough that and people have become comfortable with it, more importantly. Right. So, I remember I did some, and it was the first time that candidate had ever used a video call of any kind. And they were like, now there are very few people who have that deer in the headlights look.
Yeah.
So Patrick, this begs the question then, and I know this is going off of Chip's initial question, but what are permissible questions?
Well, it's funny. Usually people ask the other question first.
What I should not say.
Let's focus on the positive.
Are you pregnant? Do you have kids?
Are you thinking about getting pregnant?
What kind of car do you drive? What's your party affiliation?
Yeah.
All that kind of
jeez.
No. But usually, what I recommend is focus on, for this person to be successful in this role, what are the 4 or 5 key attributes that they're going to need to excel in, and kind of focus on that. And then I always like to make sure that you have multiple interviewers and have each of them cover a different area. So let's say you have one of the, let's say the role is part media placements, part external client acquisition. So have one person focus on, talk about your business development skills and how do you find new clients? How do you develop? How do you grow existing clients? Kind of deep in that.
Yep.
And then have someone else focus about, well, let's talk about your writing and how you do that. And the reason why is what tends to happen frequently is you'll have 4 interviewers. You have your Zoom calls lined up. There's no coordination about who's going to ask what.
Mm-hmm.
They all pretty much ask the same 3 or 4 questions.
Of course. Right.
And the candidate's like, these people were like really confused. So they've all gotten an inch worth of information. So they go and talk about, and none of them are really qualified if this individual is that they have basically, I feel like they'd be a good fit for us, versus a more structured approach where each of them focuses in an area. They don't have enough information when they do their debrief. And oh, by the way, I think debrief conversations after the last interview is definitely a best practice.
Totally agree.
Do not do that by email unless you don't unless the person's not a fit. You don't want to waste your time. That's totally fine. But then when each person covers their area of focus in terms of strengths and weaknesses, and if they think this person can be successful, then all of a sudden you've got a wealth of information. And it's much easier to decide which candidate's going to be the best fit for your organization. So that's the in terms of types of questions, that's probably on the top of my list. The other thing, not a question, is, for heaven's sakes, please don't forget to sell to the candidate.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yes. Make sure you understand that you're probably not the only agency they're interviewing at. They're probably talking with multiple groups, and make sure you're able to put your best foot forward and understand what's going to motivate them. That's I think key.
I think too that kind of structure keeps you out of trouble, so that if it is recorded or something does, or somebody gets stuck with, oh my gosh, I still have 15 minutes left in this meeting, what else do I ask? It prevents that from creating or asking the questions you shouldn't ask.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the selling part is just so important, and
that is important.
And it's one that I beat into people's heads because it's almost always overlooked in my experience. And you have to understand that it's part of it's the competitive thing, but part of it is that your interview is essentially the first step of onboarding. And so I will have people say, how do I onboard?
It's a really good way of looking at it.
How do I onboard an employee effectively? How do I onboard a client effectively? It all starts with your first conversation with them, even before either side has decided to commit. And so you need to treat it from that perspective where you're out there and you are presenting what the organization is like and helping them to understand it and making them want to work there, because that's going to put them in a much better place to A, choose you if they do have a competitive offer, but B, also come in, with that, a little bit more of a rah-rah mindset about the organization as opposed to, it's a job.
Yeah.
Right. So I think it's incredibly important, and I think too many people view the interview process as more akin to sort of a torture test where we're trying to find out, do you have all the skills? It's an inquisition, and I've seen particularly tech interviews I see go this way all the time, where they really try to dig into the nitty gritty, try to trip them up. Can you catch this bug in this line of code? No, make it a sales process. You can find out what their skills are without making it a grueling experience.
Yeah.
But some of those questions are just like, are you a rock or a mountain? Why?
Right. What kind of tree are you? I don't know.
Don't do that.
Well, and people have seen all these questions that Google used to ask during their interviews, these really off-the-wall things. And then other people tried to copy it. I mean, the dirty secret is, though, Google discontinued using those questions, so they don't ask those crazy questions, as I understand it, anymore. We do have a comment here from our friend John Wall. And he says, I've been able to have more than one IT exec scare me away from the management team. And we don't want to pick on IT. Well, maybe we don't want to pick on IT guys.
Not all of them.
Yeah. And then now John has decided that he's going to do what I do on their show and just try to send us
How many
totally
gas stations are in the U.S.?
Thanks, John.
I'm adding that to my interview questions.
So we've talked a bit about the process of it. But so if you're looking for someone who's going to be working remotely, what are some of the characteristics that you might be looking for in that individual that maybe you don't focus on as much if it's an in-office job?
Well, we really look for people who are self-motivated, and we try, and this is harder with, with our intern program, but we try to find, not anymore, but before last year it was harder. Try to find people who have worked from home before, because it's a different ball game. And so in the job description we'll say, are you, you have to be self-motivated and self-driven and be able to take the bull by the horns and all that kind of stuff. But in the interview process, we'll look for things like, what a normal day would look like for them, without saying, so what do you do from 8 to 9? What do you do from But we listen for triggers that, somebody, like I interviewed somebody who said they like to sit in front of on the couch in front of the TV while they work. And I was like, I just don't think that's gonna fly, so those kinds of things. And maybe you're productive that way. Just don't say it in the interview.
Right.
Or you stand at the kitchen counter, and we look for, do you have a dedicated place? Does it, it doesn't necessarily have to have a door, but do you have a dedicated place? And we've had employees where they just can't work from home, but they're great employees. And so we've given them a stipend for a co-working space. So I think there are things that you can think about from that perspective as well. But we really look for, do you have experience working from home, which everybody can say yes now. And what are the characteristics of the self-motivated, self-driven, pick things up on their own, ask questions if necessary, don't be scared that you can't just walk next door to somebody's office. We've also, with our younger staff, we find that they keep Zoom open all day with one another. That would drive me crazy, but they do it. And then they have that interaction. So
you've actually brought up an interesting question there. And obviously most people can now say I have work from home experience in the agency space. I think there are very few agency employees who didn't have to spend any time working from home over the last year. But one of the things that you raised is looking for whether they have the right environment for work from home, which I think absolutely made sense in the days where it was the exception rather than the rule. Now we're in a position where a lot more agencies are deciding to hire remote workers.
Right.
And Patrick, I'm curious from your perspective, wearing your sort of HR and compliance hat, are there concerns about using that as a criteria these days, right? Because a lot of, agencies are going to run to this more, a lot of younger employees just don't have that kind of dedicated workspace because they have roommates and all that kind of stuff. And I've been ranting and raving for the last year or so that the focus is all on parents, but there are a lot of other folks in the workforce that have challenges. So how do we look at that? Because I agree, it is a challenge for someone not to have a dedicated workspace at home, even if it's just a corner of a room where they can kind of work quietly. But, so how do you handle that from a compliance standpoint?
So it's funny. My wife works for a nonprofit, and she was on a Zoom call just this week with a very high-ranking member in the Maryland legislature who was clearly in his bedroom on this call. So it's kind of funny. Sometimes, you think about, well, what's your background going to be in a job environment?
Put up a virtual background. Jeez.
Was the bed made at least? Because I've been on Zoom calls where the bed is unmade, and that's, I don't know. If you have nowhere else to go, at least make the bed.
You would think, but anyway, in answer to your question, Chip, I do think that the environment where someone works is important, but if someone is able to get it done, and there's a kitty cat run around in the background,
I don't care about that.
Then that's fine. But I think the right question or one good way of getting at that is to give me an example of how you worked through something, and where were you when you did that, and how did you interact with other people, and how did that play out? And bear in mind, and I think Gini, your co-working example is a good one, in that there are probably going to be some people that you do want to accommodate a little bit, because they're not going to be as productive in a home environment as they are in an environment where other people are around. And if there's an easy way to do that, you might get a really good hire that you might have passed on otherwise. But by the same token, there are people who are much more productive at home, and it's like, well, that's golden. I mean,
Yep.
just we don't have to. So I always would like to, from an HR perspective, if there's a reasonable accommodation that I can make, just from a business perspective, that will get me the exact right hire that I need, I'm on it.
100%. Yeah, I totally agree.
I'm all
And
over that.
we found a social media person who was dynamite, and the only issue was that she was like, I have to be around people, and we were like, okay, we can make that happen. It won't be us people, but we can get you around people.
Yeah.
You don't want to just bring them, have them work from your house?
Listen, I just went through a year of teaching first and then second grade, and I'm just now getting to the point where I have 3 days a week by myself. No, I do not want them in my house. No.
You sound a little tense, Jenny.
It's been rough.
The day that Ginny loses it, right here,
Right
live
now.
on YouTube.
Everyone got to see.
It took 14 months, but it happened.
Yes. So, all right. So, as you're going through this process, one of the things we talked about was the interview process and having multiple people. Is there any difference in the dynamic of having multiple interviewers on a Zoom versus multiple interviewers in the same room? Because obviously, historically it's been very common to have two people sitting at the table in a conference room talking, but it's a little bit different dynamic on Zoom. So I wonder, what either of you have for a take on that.
I've seen it work.
You have.
It work well, yeah, and I feel like sometimes you get a little bit of the group dynamic with another person. And I mean, in general, I'm a favor of group interviews because, on the one hand, they have the potential of being very intimidating, but when done correctly, they can be very casual, and you can get much more information because you start to get the interplay. Like one interviewer plays off another and they share, and all of a sudden it's kind of fun, and we can kind of get to a good place. So I've seen them work well. I've seen them work okay, and I've seen them be disasters. Sometimes it just comes down to the person that you're going to be interviewing with. How well do you interact together?
With
and if
them.
that's well, I would say go for it and see how it works out. You can always split up the next time around.
Well, and I think the way that you present the structure, and this comes down to the leader, right? So if you're going to have different people ask different questions about different parts of the job responsibility, even in a group setting, you can say, okay, you make sure you get these questions answered, you make sure you get these questions answered, but still have that group dynamic. So it comes down to the preparation and the leadership of that versus go have a conversation on Zoom and see what happens.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and I've always liked the group interview, particularly for folks who are not experienced at interviewing, because it allows them to find ways to fill the gaps or things like that. A lot of folks, if they are first-time interviewers or relatively new to it, that they haven't perfected that art of listening to the answer and formulating their next question, and so they can become awkward, where they're either not fully paying attention or they're asking questions out of sequence. Just because it should be a conversation.
Right.
I mean,
They're
we say
list.
interview, we say you need to get certain questions answered, but it's a conversation.
Right.
And you got to remember that. This can't be, I've got a list of 10 questions I need the answers to, and I just kind of, work through the list 1 through 10. Right? There should be a natural flow to it, because that's how you really find out about the individual, and they really find out about you and the organization.
I see all the time where an interviewer will have a list of questions where let's say they're just going to go rogue, right? We've identified you need to focus on these 2 areas, but they're like, oh no, I've got this nailed down. And literally I've seen a whole page of questions. So it's like a 40-minute interview, and I count like 39 questions. I mean, you can't do like...
Yeah, you can't. That's
just not going to happen. And I think particularly with newer interviews, really helping them to ask that open-ended question. Give me an example of time when you did this, right? And how did that play through? And then stick with it and just let your curiosity guide the conversation. So why did you choose to solve it that way? What other things did you consider that might have contributed to the sale that you didn't do? If you had to do it again, would you do it a little bit differently? I mean, you could go on and on and on, but at the end of the day, what you learn is, what was that person's role specifically and what it was you asked them to do? What did they do? Are they kind of open about different types of solution? So, or are they fixed and rigid and this is it? And so there's no agility at all. So that's how I think you can get an interviewer to kind of break from that list of 50 questions to maybe 2 or 3 and just go nice and deep and learn a little bit about how that person handled the situation. I think that just adds a lot more for making decisions.
Mm-hmm.
My mind is still blown that people would actually record the conversation. That had never even occurred to me.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, you have to assume that every conversation
for sure. Yeah.
I mean, look at Clubhouse, right? Clubhouse is supposed to be a non-recorded environment, but how many times have I seen a video in the last 2 weeks where someone has recorded a Clubhouse conversation and put it on YouTube or Facebook or whatever, and maybe they're telling everybody on that they're doing it. I don't know, but I think it's still a violation of the terms of service to do it. But so you just never know,
right?
Anytime.
Right.
And so you always, always, always want to be aware of that. And at the same time, be very aware of everything that you're putting in writing, right? Because most of us, since we are remote, we're not having the conversation by walking, out my office door and next door into Patrick's office and saying it. We're sending an email or a text or a Slack message. All of those things are saved for posterity.
That's right.
So if you have some snarky comment about, a job candidate, don't put it in writing.
Don't put it in writing. Right.
Maybe don't say it at all, but certainly don't put it in writing.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense to do those kinds of things. So the last piece of this puzzle, I guess, is we've gone through the interview process. Now we get to the offer standpoint. Are there any differences in? Wow, and this is not pre-planned. I had no idea that apparently Patrick
is his thing.
Apparently
it's the best part.
I think in over a decade of knowing and working with Patrick, I've never seen him this excited, including when he talks about dive vacations or his kids. So, so the offer. Patrick, I guess you want to say something.
It's the best part. The whole offer process, determining ahead of time what do we think is going to motivate this candidate. How do we put the package together? Are we going to potentially offer a sign-on bonus? Do we want to have something we're willing to do to get this over? Doing a pre-close with a candidate. Have someone who's not the supervisor extend the offer, because if there's push and pull, then let someone else do that. This stuff is awesome. I love it.
I've never. That's a really good point. I've never thought to do that.
Yeah, and then when the candidate accepts, then have the supervisor call the candidate or do a Zoom and welcome them to the organization. Send a fruit basket or something. Think about the celebrations that companies have when people leave. Well, they're leaving. Why are you having a celebration?
Right. Why are you celebrating?
Have a celebration when they come.
Right.
That's exciting. I love the offer process. It's my favorite part of all of HR.
So here's what I've learned. I've learned that from now on, I will do interviews by holding up my questions on a piece of paper. Bring them down. I'm going to hire Patrick to do the hiring. And I already know I'm going to hire Chip to do the firing if that ever happens.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm just going to sit here, ride my bike. Done.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, I do want to echo Patrick's point about having someone else be the person to extend the offer. I think
that's a really great point. I've never thought of that.
It's a super valuable tool for a bunch of different reasons. But this is something that I always say to business owners. Anytime that you're in some sort of a negotiation, you always, if you've got business partners, you never put them all in the room together. Like if you're selling your business, you always want someone outside the room. There's that same advantage here because you have someone who can be the good guy who comes in and rescues it if it starts to go off the rails.
Right.
But you also then, that person who's having the conversation can easily say, I need to go back and check.
Right.
And so what that does is that gives you time to think about it and process it. And so particularly for those of us who are owners of our businesses, if we're the one extending the offer, then we're in a position where if the candidate says, well, I really need $5,000 more. Well, you're the ultimate decision maker. They know that. So I mean, yes, you can say I need some time to think about it, but that's not as effective as if Patrick's extending the offer and says I need to go back and check,
Right.
And they know that he doesn't have the authority to sign off on it,
Right.
So it changes the dynamic up so that you can more rationally figure out how to counter offers and things like that.
And if looking at it from the candidate's perspective, if I'm the manager and the candidate says, I need another $5,000 to make this work, and I go, sure, you got it. Well, what's the candidate think?
I should have asked for 10.
You should have asked for more. Whereas if the candidate asks me, the HR person, and I go, well, I don't know. Let me check and see, and I'll get back with you later this afternoon. And then it's like, hey, good news, had to work, but they're willing to go for an extra $5,000. We'd really love to have you come on board. Candidate thinks, wow, hey, that's
right.
cool.
That's an interesting mindset
Right.
shift. Yeah. Interesting.
Yep. So that's great advice. Unfortunately, that brings us to the end of our
So
time.
soon, we just got started.
I know. I'm
just
pretty
got to his favorite part.
I'm pretty confident that the three of us could go on for much longer, but
Oh my gosh.
that's not how this show is structured. Fortunately for lots of people. But Patrick, if someone wants to learn more about you and Ignition HR and maybe tap into more of your advice, where can they find you?
IgnitionHR.com. I'm easy to find.
That is easy.
Excellent. And Ginny, if there is anyone in the agency community that doesn't know where to find Spin Sucks, where can they find it?
Spinsucks.com.
There you go.
That's pretty simple. I like that. And of course, you can listen to, what's the name of your podcast, Ginny?
The Wicked Cool One?
The Wicked Cool one. Not that other one. The Wicked Cool one.
The Agency Leadership Podcast.
Yeah, and you can find that at agencyleadershippodcast.com. So, and of course, if you'd like to learn more about the Small Agency Growth Alliance saga, just go to small-agency-growth.com. So, with that, I hope you all have a great weekend, and I look forward to seeing you back here for next Friday's show with two panelists that I don't know yet because I don't look in advance. It's more fun just to walk in and see what magic might happen.
I like it.
Have a good weekend, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.